some stuff just in terms of housekeeping that you can impart to people as they join us at your table. So first of all, and probably one of the most important, is how you gain access to the internet here. So OCC Public is the name of the site, and OCC Public is also the password. So again, OCC Public and OCC Public for the password. And I just logged in, so it shouldn't be too difficult. My name is Harlan Gibbs. I am the newly minted Chief of Staff at Glendale Adventist. And pardon me if I try not to embarrass myself as the day goes on. But let me tell you why this is happening. A number of months ago, a group of us went to Vegas and had an opportunity to hear a presentation on peer review from Paul Berardi. And we were incredibly impressed. Horty Springer is the law firm which he's associated with, and they had helped us rewrite our bylaws last year and a half. And what we discovered was one of those phrases of, you don't know what you don't know. And with us, with peer review, we have a system that's been in place for quite a long period of time and have not looked critically at how we can improve it. And again, we go back to sometimes you don't know outside of your own sphere, exactly what is out there. And what Horty Springer and what Mr. Berardi gave us during that time was a perspective on where the world is going with peer review. What you do with this information on an individual basis at your own hospital is really up to you. You can take this information and decide that what you're doing is terrific. Or you can take this information and decide that there are ways to improve it and really mold it to what is right for you. So I'll talk about Mr. Berardi, who is, again, with Horty Springer. There is a bio sheet on this. What I will tell you is that he was, and I'm going to put you kind of behind the eight ball, incredibly entertaining and a great speaker, and really provided tremendous information for us.
What course did you go to?
Exactly. But now for the challenge. The challenge is that in Vegas we were there for 3 days, and he had, with his associate, 3 days to be able to give us all this information. So now we're here for 1 day. So it's going to be kind of a shotgun course. It'll be a real challenge. But really the aim of this is to show you that there are opportunities out there to improve on certain processes that we may not even be aware that there are opportunities for change. And so with that, I give you Mr. Berardi, and I look forward to the day.
Oh, thank you so much. Incredibly kind intro, completely not merited in the least, so thank you for that. But to jump right into it, this must be a special kind of hell for you good folks to devote an entire day to the scintillating topic of peer review with a chump lawyer from Pittsburgh, right? It doesn't get any better for you, right? This is without any doubt the most enjoyable part of my professional existence. And why? And as my fellow lawyer can tell you, lawyers rarely get to give good news. Lawyers rarely get to give good news. And the good news that I hope sticks, at least for the most part, is that there has been a complete and total sea change in the world of peer review for the better. And we all get caught up into our siloed existences, and we adhere to processes that are competent, that may do okay, but when we have the inability sometimes to learn from each other. So one of the things that I take great joy and pleasure in is we have a very unique law firm, unique or weird depending on your perspective. And I haven't done anything for the last 30 years than spend most of my day job working with physicians in the trenches on medical staff issues. I think it's the greatest job in the world, right? So whether it's that difficult application, or whether somebody says there's the 13th Amendment against slavery, you're not gonna make me take call, or whether someone's throwing bovies in the OR, whatever it's going to happen, that's my normal day job. But through the course of doing that, we've had the privilege of working with so many medical staffs on peer review issues that we've kind of seen, well, that's been traditional and that's been around for a while. It's proven that it doesn't work. Well, here's a kernel that some medical staff divined that has made the process better. So what I'd like to do is to take those kernels that we've learned from medical staffs around the country, add our little spin to it, and show you, I think, how the world has definitely changed. Now, here's our day. as Harlan already said, it is an overly ambitious schedule. So we know that on the front end. We are merging 3 days into 1 day, but I promise you that we're going to get through all the major high spots. I'm a little bit fearful that I turn into the fire hose that's drowning you. So I want to make sure that as we're going through these concepts, because having reviewed your current documents, there are obviously competent provisions in your current documents, but I was giddy excited at how many opportunities that you might have if they make sense to you, because your policies embody the traditional peer review world that's been around for the last 20 years. So I think there's some opportunities for you to kind of pick and choose on what might make sense. But so that I avoid being that fire hose to you, please, if something doesn't make sense, irrespective of what's on the schedule, smoke them if you got them. If you have a question, smoke it if you got it. I'd rather us make sure that we hit the sweet spot for you. We will definitely get through most of the agenda that we've kind of prepared. And here's how the day looks. The day looks is I'm going to start with a personally painful experience in terms of how I was completely, totally pancaked as a lawyer. And you're going to get to hear the pain of what happened to me in the peer review world that led me to completely transform my thinking in peer review 15 years ago. And in the course of me telling you this painful experience, we will review those very traditional aspects of a peer review process that have been around forever that now definitively I know that don't work. And when we're reviewing that, if you've had enough coffee and you're already in the game this morning, you better recognize a bunch of the things because they're reflected in your current policies. And I want you to say, does it make sense to change or not? Once we get through that bad news, then it gets a little bit fun. I want to do a mini little David Letterman for you. I want to go through and say, peer review, it's not one size fits all. Every medical staff culture is different. There's no one exact shape or size on how to do it, but there is a very well-established top 10. That these top 10 elements, if you want your process to hit the home run, these 10 elements should be buried and embodied into your policy. So we'll start with the clinical world. After that, we're going to shift gears and say one of the things that you may be doing in practice, but it's not reflected in your peer review documents is one of the most important and effective interventions that you can do with a colleague is to have a successful face-to-face collegial intervention, right? And everybody loves the words collegial intervention. What's the problem? Physicians busy in leadership, they hang on to the word collegial and forget about the word intervention. And if you want to have a conversation where you're one and done, and that's the goal of any conversation, there are a couple of things that you better do every single time to be able to hit that home run. And then there's always the question of, well, how do you document that? And where do we keep that documentation? So I thought we'd spend a little bit of time on that since that's a major component of a physician leader's life. After that, there's no bigger sea change anywhere than in the area of professional conduct. And starting in this state 1 million years ago with an unfortunate case that was 30-some years ago, happily we're going to show how far that tide has now changed. And I just want to give you a mini view of what I'm sure is preaching to the saved already, how the world now views whether or not professional conduct is a core element of patient safety and quality of care. And so I think that every time I present it, my head spins a little bit. But then more importantly, once we get through just the sensitizing about where we are with behavior, I want to talk about an effective professionalism policy. Because lots of medical staffs have disruptive physician policies. That's truly offensive to have policies entitled that, and that's 20-year-old thinking. Lots of medical staffs have codes of conduct because the joint said you have to have a code of conduct. That's 20-year-old thinking. We should rally around something that tries to rally the best in everybody that serves in every medical staff, and we should have a professionalism policy that allows us to vet issues with conduct. And when there's a problem with conduct, the fixes for helping a colleague be a success that's struggling with conduct are very different than the fixes that exist for when you're trying to fix a clinical issue. So the performance improvement plan options for both are slightly different, and I want to review those. If you're still hanging in there and surviving at that point, then I want to do a deeper dive. And I want to do a deeper dive into the performance improvement plans that work for quality. And I'm thrilled to have a legal friend from Cali here to help me vet these insane 805 issues that we struggle with when we come to your state. But I think it's important to know that there are so many examples of what medical staffs are now utilizing to help colleagues who are struggling on the clinical side become a success. And what should be the goal of every medical staff? Goal number one, it's in your DNA, patient care and safety, right? That's why you do what you do. But what's goal number two? We should have a medical staff culture that permits every single physician that devotes his or her career to our medical staff to be a success. Most don't need any help to do that. There will be those that need your help to do that. You need the right tools to help colleagues be a success. So I want to spend some time on what works and what doesn't work. And when it comes to clinical performance improvement plans for clinical matters, I can tell you definitively, having served as a counsel to the data bank on different occasions, none of these things are reportable to the data bank. The challenge in your good state is that you have an overly aggressive state board, and so we have to vet some issues on how do we still help somebody without going to discipline, recognizing that some of those matters might be reported in California, but how, when that occurs, how can we make it more palatable to any physician who's subject to it? And that's the game, and that's what we were brainstorming about before we started. If you're still surviving at that point, this is what I'm worried about the fire hose, then I wanted to spend just a few minutes on the wonderful thing called OPPE and FPPE to confirm competence. And I have to tell you respectfully, I am not the brightest bulb on the tree. Trust me on that. When I read your current OPPE and FPPE policies, I was struggling to kind of connect the dots. So I'm sure it's inherent to you and it flows like magic. I was struggling with it. And it seemed to be a tad overly complex. So I just want to say, here's another option to think about on how an OPPE process should run and how to confirm the competence of the new people that join you. So see what you think about that. And then last but not least, and see, you're probably tired just hearing the intro, right? Last but not least, I thought we'd end on one about practitioner health. When I was a much younger man, every practitioner health issue was an impairment issue. Somebody's struggling with an addiction. Well, now that's probably 2 out of every 5 calls that I get. As the population ages, as other health issues are becoming more prevalent, we need a modern practitioner health policy that takes the larger view. And as a part of that, and it's a lightning rod that was, rejuvenated, I guess, or reinstituted in this great state, because when in May of 2012, or whenever that was, that Stanford posted on its website its late career practitioner policy, all of a sudden the whole medical staff world across this country got interested again in how do we factor in the aging process on a medical staff. And it shows you, it's a perfect, your state shows the acute conflict that surrounds that topic. Because Stanford's getting all kinds of love and praise for being proactive, following up on what the New England Journal has been publishing for years, following up on what JAMA has been publishing, saying, hey, we as health professionals, we understand the aging process better than anybody, and patient care comes first. We should figure it out. No one has a solution for that, right? But when Stanford publishes on its website that policy, everybody's saying, I guess they deserve the reputation they have. 3 years, almost to the month, after they publish that, what happens? The faculty at Stanford comes back and says, we're waiting for a test case. We as a faculty are going to support any lawsuit that any one of our faculty members wants to bring because they were discriminated against because of the ADEA, because they were told to slow down when they reached 80. It just shows you the kind of heat that generates that topic. For as strong opinionated as I can be, as strongly opinionated as I can be, and there are many things that I'll beg you, this is a practice that I've seen 50 times before you dismiss it, think hard about it. When it comes to what the right fix is for health issues and what the options are, at the end of our day, I'm just going to go through all the options that we are seeing different medical staffs choose. That's one area where there has not been a complete consensus that that's the sweet spot. But by laying out those options, hopefully you can say, with your culture, do we want any? And if we do, what options are available to us? Makes sense. Aggressive day. Yes? Yep. See? Does anybody want to run for the door now? Because in a couple of minutes I'm going to have it locked and you will be stuck here all day. But I don't have to worry about anybody working on their short game though today, right? There's nobody going to sneak out there. So that was a benefit to a lawyer. Let's jump in. We're going to start on this clinical world, and I want to start on this painful story. What's the painful story? I have done nothing but medical staff law close to 30 years. And I can remember halfway through my career thinking, well, wait a second. I don't do anything else but medical staff peer review. I might not be the brightest lawyer, but I don't know of too many other lawyers that devote their entire lives to peer review, i.e., I have to know this thing called peer review at least as well as other lawyers around the country, right? Hubris, ego, it's always a dangerous thing. What happens? 15 years ago, I get completely pancaked. How do I get pancaked? All of a sudden, our firm starts to get medical staff after medical staff that are sending us their peer review policies to review. And it was interesting. There was a dramatic spike. We've done that work for the existence of the firm, right? There was a dramatic spike on how many medical staffs were ringing our doorbell. And we can't blame it on the Joint Commission because this predated all the Joint Commission's fun in 07 with OPPE and FPPE, so we can't lay it off on the Joint, right? At about the same time, there were a number of medical staffs that said, hey, Horty Springer, we're willing to pay your airfare, come to our hospital and medical staff, hang out for a couple of days, and do an audit of our peer review process. Now, again, we tried to figure out, well, we've always done those, but why was there this spike? And as a quick aside here, because we can't blame it on the Joint Commission, we know a couple of those audits occurred because of disasters that occurred on the medical staff, and the medical staff and sometimes the board said, we don't understand it, do a deep dive. So a couple of them were because of the unfortunate things that occur. But we think a number of those audits and a number of the requests for us to review those policies actually came from more and more board members who were starting to go to IHI courses, Institute for Healthcare Improvement. Anybody here ever been to an IHI course, right? Right, you get the drill? And we think that those board members were hearing people like Donnie Berwick or whomever was doing it at the time, the board members were hearing, of course you have to support administrative strategy, and of course you have to help keep the doors open. But as a board member, your primary obligation is the health and safety of every patient that swings in and out of the door. And we think that those board members were going back to the administrative teams, and we think they were going back to the medical executive committees and saying, hey, this is your game. You as a medical staff own peer review. How are we doing? And we think that a number of those medical staffs were looking for validation. That's one guess, but more about the IHI in a minute. Long story short, how did I get pancaked? I'm one of the 2 partners in the firm that gets selected to do all of this peer review work. My partners actually basically said, Paul, you love those creatures called physicians. You dig this stuff called peer review. We want you to review every single peer review policy that comes our way. We want you to do every audit. Now, what did my partners want? We know how law firms work. What did my partners really want me to do? They wanted me to be in Grants Pass, Oregon, or Denton, Texas, or Danbury, Connecticut, you name it, and they wanted me through my work to have found that medical staff that had divined how to do this thing called peer review consistently and constructively. Then they thought I could bring it back home to Horty Springer, we'd put a bow on it, and we'd sell it, right? Well, what was the bad news that came out of all of that work? Well, I love that work, and I continue to do it through today. I did not find one medical staff anywhere that was able to do this thing well. And what was worse? How did I get pancaked? All of the things that I had so confidently touted from a podium as to the best way to do peer review for the first 15 years of my career were all proven to not work in the least. It was an incredibly humbling experience. But through that experience, we were able to find out what did work. So let's first start, though, with the bad news, right? And as I kidded around when we started, if you don't recognize a few of these, then you don't know your own peer review policy. But let's just jump on in. Let's start with some easy ones. And since we're waking up together, if this first 10, 15 minutes is a picture show, right? Does this make it any easier? Right? Now, you're probably thinking, duh, chump lawyer, of course we know that most physicians view peer review as a punitive, negative thing. Duh, you're wasting my time. Why do I start with this? What did I learn? Of course we all know that, right? What I didn't realize until I interviewed a gazillion physicians was how deep it runs to the core of a physician. And let me slow down for a second. When I would be doing interviews with either medical staff leaders or just at-large members of the medical staff as a part of an audit, it didn't take me long, maybe the first interview, at most the second interview, to find the prototypical physician. Who is the prototypical physician? It's that individual that recognizes what? You've been given great gifts, right? It's that physician that also recognizes that what you do on a daily basis is more complex than the rest of the world can really fathom. And that individual that realizes that despite your gifts, because of the complexity, we don't always get the outcome that we want for a patient, and that doesn't mean that we have negligent, reckless people out there. So who's the prototypical physician? Always with zeal to do the best, but recognizes that life isn't perfect, i.e. confident in his or her own skin. When I got to have candid interviews with those physicians through till today, and they know that we're on the same side, and they know that I'll never write their name down in a book as a part of any kind of a report, what comes to light more often than I'd care to think about when I'm asking them about what they think about peer review? All right, Paul, let's just be candid about this. I don't mean any ill will to my medical staff or my hospital. I want to make sure that I don't gunk up the works, whatever we need to do for accreditation and state licensure and the conditions of I don't want to screw it up. But I have to tell you that I could care less personally if we have an effective peer review process or not. Why? Because as a busy practicing physician in the trenches, I cannot think of one single good thing that could happen to me if I was an agenda item in a peer review committee meeting. I mean, that's how devastating as it was. And then it got worse. When I would interview some of your colleagues around the country that had maybe a slightly more paranoid bent to the world, you know, and I would ask them what their views of peer review were, that was cheap theater for the outsiders. You know, well, I don't know. There's a small power brokering group of docs on our medical staff. I don't know all their names. You just want to stay away from them. They're doing. I thought, wow, you know, I don't have any medical training, but that kind of paranoia might be diagnosable. You may need to talk to somebody, right? You got to that level. So what was the punchline? Why do we start with this? In every single one of those medical staffs, there were fantastic people in the quality department that were cheerleaders. There were physicians who had found religion about modern peer review, and they were cheerleaders, and they were saying the right things. What are the right things to say about PPE and peer review? The right things to say are, this process should be used as an educational process. This process is intended to make highly skilled people continuously better in what they do. This process is intended that when we find a colleague who is struggling, and you will, our process should provide us with a toolkit that allows us to dip into, work with our colleague in a constructive manner to help patients be safe, that's job number one, but to also help them avoid the train wreck. So there have been these people saying that in hospitals forever, and yet the results are still abysmal. And why are the results abysmal? First practical tip, medical staffs on God's good earth are the toughest audience anywhere. And unless you can marry those wonderful bromides about what peer review is intended to be, with practical in the trenches, let me tangibly show you, you will never win the discussion in the surgery lounge. You will never convince somebody in the hospital hallway that we're doing something differently. So in a couple of minutes when we do our David Letterman top 10 tips, the first tip, as simplistic as it is the single best way we've been observing medical staffs are changing the culture. It's showing your colleagues. Stay tuned, right? What's number 2? What's this? The black hole of peer review, right? How do cases get into the black hole of peer review? We could spend from now until 4 p.m. filling up the black hole. What are the big ones? And you better pay attention because some are in your world. Number 1, we are shocked how few places have one central repository of information about a physician's performance. And sometimes it's an organizational problem. Sometimes it's innocent, but it's an organization structural problem. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes the good folks in medical staff office and services protect data. Sometimes people in the quality department think they have to protect data, and one's more legally protected under California law than the other, or at least that's what the perception is, that sometimes we have a little bit of fighting over the data, right? So that happens. But what's more devastating to the physician world, since that's where we are today, the more devastating thing is when I run across my physician leaders that I work every day with who keep private stashes. Does anybody know of a physician who keeps a private stash? Well, I'm going to have a discussion with her, but I just really want this to be between me and her at this point, and I'm going to keep a note on my hard drive, or I'm still old school and I'm penning this out, right? And it never sees the light of day of a quality file. Now, why is that a really ill-advised practice to do? One legal reason, one practical reason. The legal reason, and I'm not a fearmonger the way I lawyer. I know that you don't have a fearmonger the way she lawyers, right? But what's the legal reason why that doesn't make sense? You may not like the lawyers out there that do plaintiff's work. You may not admire them, right? Please never get sucked in and underestimate how bright some of the lawyers are that do plaintiff's work, right? And those lawyers know well you can't get traditional documents from a peer review file, but what's a new theory? It's not even new anymore. Those lawyers are starting to go to credentialing and peer review courses to learn how the processes are supposed to be done. Why? For the noble reason of helping you? No, to use it against you, right? As a quick aside, when we're doing one of our national courses and we see somebody that has ESQ at the end of their name, or it's a law firm, and we don't know them to be friendlies, we don't know them to represent medical staffs and hospitals, we politely disinvite them. We can do that as a private enterprise, right? Guess what? There's a lot of credentialing and peer review courses out there, and they're going. But how do I get to my point? I don't want to get distracted from the point. What are those plaintiffs' lawyers now saying? Well, in a med-mal lawsuit, I would like Dr. So-and-so's credentials and quality file. Well, you can't have it. Well, okay. Does the department chair have any notes about any issues or concerns privately? Does the chief of staff have any issues or notes? Does our chief medical officer have any issues or notes? And what are they trying to do? They're trying to show that unless you here have a policy, and I'm willing to bet a gin and tonic this tall that you don't, unless you have a policy saying that the private stashes of individual physician leaders are an official part of the California protected, statutorily protected quality file, it's open game whether or not that plaintiff's lawyer is going to get the private stash. So one, that's a legal reason why we don't want to do it. But the practical reason is much more important, right? The practical reason is one of the main messages from today is the only way to come up with the right fix for a colleague who might be having a performance issue is to have a really good idea of what has already happened, where you've been, what discussions have occurred, and where you can go. And one of my major concerns with your current policies, very respectfully, is that you're really high on step-by-step process, and it's almost completely devoid of what specific interventions. You should be spending way more time on the interventions rather than some of the process steps that are in there, but more about that. All right, the beat goes on, and please smoke them if you got them, right? What's another reason why? When you go through residency training and you go through medical school before then, and you suffer through that, you learn so much stuff. What's not one of the things that what don't you learn? How to be a member of a medical staff. What do bylaws mean? How to review a case. What does it mean in physician leadership? It is not an innate skill. It's a learned skill. That's why for the past 40 years we've been doing leadership conferences that sell out most years. There's a desperate need for physicians that do that, right? Do you know how many times I'll get a phone call from an incredibly sophisticated and educated physician reviewer who will say to me, with an IQ that I can't even see how much higher it is than mine, and they'll say, all right, I was asked to be a reviewer. I don't want to sound dumb. I got some questions for you. I really don't know how I do it. What language do I use? What's the proper way when I'm doing a clinical review to characterize my review so I get us to where we need to go, but I don't hurt a colleague? Hey, wait a second. This is a confidential peer review matter. Am I, as a reviewer, allowed to go talk to the nurse who is involved in the care as a part of my fact-finding, or am I overstepping the bounds? Hey, wait a second. Am I going to get sued for doing this? Hey, wait a second. And there's a million questions that are easy to handle when you've been through it 50 times, and yet what do? We simply expect, for whatever reason, that when someone gets thrown in and asked to do a review of a case, they inherently are going to do it well. Not a chance. 1 second, I'll come right back to you, okay? So one of the things that is a strong recommendation would be, please, if nothing else, help yourselves. Come up with a mini little checklist that would say to any of your current department steering committees, and I'm struggling saying that because I have some reservations about that, but we'll talk about that. If any of your department steering committees are doing a clinical review of a case, or any individual prior to them, since I think it goes to an individual prior to your department steering case, have a checklist that allows that person with your skill set in 60 seconds or less to get the main principles, fly and do the documentation. It will dramatically improve the efficiency, but also the effectiveness of finding. And you're going to see some examples as we go through today. I'm sorry, I shut you off there for a second.
I don't care. It's fine.
No, I care.
Okay, well, I'll ask my question, but I'm a little puzzled as to what document you're talking about. I've never heard one in all my years
Of what?
asked to do anything else other than review the case in front of them. I don't think they have time to go ask the person to do one. I've never seen one. That's usually our work. Not that I care, but
Well, help me to understand the hour.
mental staff people, or
Gotcha.
recruiting people, whatever. But I've never seen a physician actually want to even. They don't have time for that. So are you seeing that, or
I have.
am I missing something?
For the most part, what you do in your world is the absolute backbone for the process. So there's no doubt. The fact-finding, the pulling together to do that, there's no doubt about it. But when it comes to certain things of complexity, when there has to, or even with the physician at issue, I as an individual reviewer, well, I don't necessarily want to be front and center, but I need to talk to my colleague. How do I do that if I don't want to come front and center? Then I don't know what the answer to that question is. Now, that comes to you know that. Well, when I talk to my colleague, what am I allowed to represent? Where are we in the process? Am I a decision maker or not? And all of a sudden, those clinical reviewers, when you get very busy, bright people that don't immediately know the answer, then normally they don't perform as well as they should, respectfully. But you're the judge. You're the judge. So you see how your clinical reviews are. Yeah. I think it's not a common thing, but I think it happens with mature processes. Okay? Please, please, please. All right, you ready? Please tell me that you recognize this as we're going through some of the bad stuff. And I know that there are exceptions. There aren't many. But anytime I see, very respectfully, a peer review process that is department or specialty centric, meaning that it lives and dies in each individual department, very respectfully, I'm betting you 2 gin and tonics. It is not serving your medical staff well. There might be bright lights on your medical staff. I've lived long enough to know that. There will be certain departments that have an interesting culture within the department and the right assemblage of personalities where they're able to kind of figure it out and do it consistently well and constructively. But I'm willing to bet that at most, that's one a hospital, one a medical staff. And one of the jobs of a medical staff is to do what? For any physician that devotes his or her career to our world, we have an obligation, irrespective of your specialty, to have a consistent process that allows everybody to be reviewed to the extent possible in a consistent manner. And if we have one great department doing it well and 9 that don't, we're missing the mark, especially for what we're supposed to be doing in peer review. Much more about that. And when I am at the worst of all, and I know you're not doing this, the worst scenario I ever see is to still literally take a step back 20 years and have peer review being conducted at department meetings. That's insane. You're happily one step way beyond that with department steering committees. But when I go to department steering committees, whatever the proper name would be, wherever medical staff I'm in, and I watch the physicians in the room try to struggle with a more significant issue when they've only seen one of that in the last 8 years, versus when I'm in a multi-specialty peer review committee that has done 10 of them, it's not even close, the result that we get to, the sophistication. I'm going to tell you a story about a multi-specialty peer review committee when we come forward. Not to force it, I just want you to make sure eyes are wide open and you're not missing an enormous opportunity. So that was the strike one. When I saw that in your and I couldn't tell from the current policy, and I know that it's all under work, I couldn't tell exactly what the role was of your MSPRC. I just couldn't tell where it fit into that, but it seemed from your documents that most peer review was in that world of a department steering committee, and then occasionally we were jumping from there to the MEC. And that's another issue that I have. You're going to hear in a couple of minutes that contrary to what's been traditional, the medical executive committees on medical staffs should play almost no role in day-to-day clinical and behavioral peer review if we want to get the most constructive responses quickly. So more about that. I know it's non-traditional, don't throw anything. I don't mind if you disagree, but make sure that we have a good discussion about it. All right, the hits keep coming. How about this one? What's this? Another reason why it doesn't work, right? This is fascinating to me. There is a wide range of how we get the input from the physician whose case is under review. Medical staff to medical staff varies on this. And on the one extreme, there are those medical staffs that abuse a noble principle of peer review. What is a noble principle of peer review? We should never make a determination about the quality or appropriateness of care that we're reviewing unless the caregiver who is directly involved is participating in that discussion. We have to know his or her perspective and what they were thinking and what went on. That's right, right? Well, what do some medical staffs do? They abuse that by saying, well, okay, in the spirit of transparency, we want to make sure that anybody that has any case that's under review immediately gets notified that a case of yours is going to be reviewed. And when I did the deep dive on those approaches on medical staffs and asked the physicians and leadership, well, how's that working for you? What was almost the unanimous response? Oh, it's terrible. It's like a special kind of hell. I haven't even looked at the case. I don't know if there's a concern or not. My colleague found out that I'm on a committee that's going to be looking at it. I'd be walking down the hallway. I'd be getting dragged into an empty patient room, and my colleague was telling me chapter and verse of everything they did with that. And many times we look at those cases, and there's no way to get better, and we don't have to get people whipped into a frenzy. So it was the too premature notification of a physician. What's the other extreme? Which is even worse. Those medical staffs that choose to involve their colleagues via certified return receipt requested mail. Has anybody in this room ever gotten a single good thing through certified return receipt mail? And you're going to see it, and this is the kind of language that we see on how many medical staffs will do this. After the case is reviewed and a score is assigned. More about that in a minute. We're notified by certified mail and notified of their right to appeal. Let's immediately drop the gloves and make this a confrontational thing. So one of the things that I think you're doing pretty close to what we think is a best practice now, I want to reinforce what you're doing. It seems like in your current processes, when an individual reviewer or the initial review is occurring, if the physician chooses not to provide input, your process continues and makes a finding at a lower level. I agree with that. When it gets to a more intensified review, then the stakes are higher, and if a physician refuses not to provide input, then that leads to an automatic timeout of their ability to practice. That's absolutely what we think is state of the art. So if I'm reading your policies right, that was one, since I know I'm coming across negative, that was one I said, you're all over it and you're ahead of the curve. More about that when we go through the day. How about this corny one? Another reason why peer review doesn't work. What are we trying to reflect with this corny slide? Everybody remember this from Psych 101 when we were back in college? Everybody see the cute little button nose, the young girl with her nose, she's looking off into the distance? Everybody see the much older woman? Here's the profile of her nose. What am I trying to reflect with this silly slide? We're looking at the wrong things in peer review. There are medical staffs out there that are still looking at every single unplanned return to surgery as a separate peer review matter. Does that make any sense in today's world? Of course not. Now isn't a great OPPE criteria. You and your medical staff